had some. Yeah.
They were very out of the blue.
Okay, so last week we had Jacob wrestling with God,
Oh, cool.
and it's got to be one of the most looked at and studied passages in the patriarchal material, just because of the setting, wrestling with God, and actually striving. And God says, you're up to the task of striving with me, which most of us think, how can that be? And then, and we didn't cover a lot of that, but you begin to think, okay, we know that God can do whatever he wants to with a person, but he allows this conflict between him and Jacob to happen. And happen in such a way that at the end, Jacob is not defeated, he's not the victor, but he's coming out of it with more than he went in, because he's now blessed. He gets his blessing, finally, the blessing that he's been striving for.
With a messed up hip.
Well, yeah, with a messed up hip. And so we're going to look at a little bit of that, because earlier Jacob prays, and if we go back to chapter 32, around verse 9, I want to go back and just look over it. 9, 10, 11, and 12 says, "Then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac." Oh, this is the longest prayer uttered in Genesis by now. This is the most wordy that anybody has gotten, and it comes out of Jacob's mouth, who didn't give God much of the time of day the whole time he was with Laban. So he says that God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. Number one, prosper. And then he says, I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. Most honest thing he's probably ever said. Says, indeed, I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two camps. Please rescue me from my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. And this is a great admission on his part. He's been able to swindle folks that he might have been threatened by, and actually come out ahead. But here he's kind of reaching that point where he's willing for God's will to run its course for him, as long as it takes care of his problem with Esau. Otherwise, he says, Esau may come and attack me, the mothers, and their children. You have said, I will cause you to prosper. Second time he said that. And I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to be counted. Kind of repeating in abbreviated form the Abrahamic covenant. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he stays there, and then we get down here where in verse 24, Jacob wrestles with God. So the prayer is that he prosper. Okay, and everything that Jacob has done to prosper, he's had to pretty much lie, cheat, and steal to get it, right? But can you do that with God? The only way to get anything from the hand of God is for God to provide it. You can't take it. You can't manipulate him. You can't do any of those things. And here we have, in this scene, where Jacob is left alone and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. The writer's real shrouded and cloaked in who this man is until the very end. He says, when the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, let me go, for it is daybreak. So the first one to speak here is the man. Okay? And what has he done? There's great symbolism, and there's probably a great literal outcome from the whole thing. He hits Jacob in the place where Jacob has been able to sow his seed and produce offspring. But now, he's hit him so hard there, his hip's out of socket. So Jacob now is denied any independent activity, sexual activity, that may bring about the prospering. It's going to have to depend upon God. We don't know that that's the man yet, but so he says, but Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me.
Such a weird thing to say right there.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel like he says
Yeah.
it before though. Like that's not the first time he's like playing a game with someone.
Well, before he stole the blessing, this is right out of Esau's mouth. Bless me. And there's no blessing to give from Isaac. But here, I mean, Jacob already has everything that he's ever wanted. Excuse me. As far as blessing and prosperity, except from this one. And he's lived the kind of life that he's lived it on his own and never has even allowed God into the picture until this prayer that he offers previously, where he says twice, Lord, you have told me to prosper, now I want to prosper. And so they're in this struggle. He says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he says, what is your name? Okay, so blessing, what is your name? Jacob replied, your name, he says, Jacob, he replied. He says, your name will no longer be Jacob. He said, it will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he answered, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. It's like, certainly you know who I am. Hey!
There she is.
I'm glad to meet you.
I was on the phone with the big CEF day yesterday, and of course the state director calls me because we're good friends. But it was almost a circus yesterday, and if my state director had been there yesterday, she would have blew us off.
Oh my goodness.
So all I'm gonna say is I'm so glad it was you, because I kept ringing that ball animal in. We had 4 different churches, 4 different religions, with a new director in Slidell, but we were in North Covington, and what we thought we was going to training was so not it. This was all people who didn't even know what a Good News Club was, much less.
Oh, goodness.
She had me under the guise of I was coming to train a team. Well, when we go to train a team, it's totally different when we go to introduce the ministry. Yesterday should have been an introduction to the ministry.
Yeah.
This is who we are, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
This is what, if you want a part of this, then we come back when you have your team in place.
So the material didn't match your audience at all.
But the material is wonderful, no matter what we teach,
Right.
because the introduction is always the wordless,
Yeah.
the evangelistic part. But once you start doing the particulars of the club, all the legalities, all the background checks, the school, the permission, just everything, you gotta have your team in place. And they were all like, well, we don't know what we're doing. She didn't even have a team leader. And then I realized there were 4 churches, because there was 3 pastors. Well, Mary was like, there were 3 pastors. I said, Mary, I was doing everything in my power to love them all the pastors and let them know we're not this crazy, that we really do a good job.
Oh my goodness.
Without trying to make her look like she didn't know what she was doing. And then she would smart off to me sometimes. What do you mean we? I would always use the term we.
Yeah.
We, CEF.
Yeah.
Because I'm representing the world's largest children's ministry.
Right.
And I wanted to say, you better sit down and shut up, because if you say one more time nobody does anything but you're going to be in lots of trouble.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell on you. So I'm going to tell on you.
Oh.
It's just me. I said, all you have to do is call the state. We're there. So the pastors picked up on that really quick.
Yeah.
They want dummies, huh?
No. Do you want one of these?
Oh yeah. My
I'll
wife
take it,
does.
actually.
It's for me. It's in my hand. It's in my hand.
I get to fight Patsy for it.
That's
So-
not here. I'll roll.
I'm the closest thing to Patsy Bruce.
You know, we're,
She's the one who needs all your money between now and January.
January. I gotta pay for flowers by the end of this month. Then.
I already gave you my expense check for that.
So you did. I didn't get your expense check.
No, you didn't get it, but it's gone.
Poor daddy, poor daddy. Who's doing your flowers for you?
I'm buying them wholesale and having a group of girls help me.
Oh, so you're doing silk?
I'm doing the real flowers.
Oh, you
so
already did
I'm
your
not
fresh?
gonna do a florist. I'm buying them
Oh, gotcha,
wholesale.
gotcha.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry. She asked a question.
So we've suspended the wrestling with God.
Where we at? I'm sorry.
We're backtracking a little bit from the last time we were here about the story with Jacob wrestling with God.
Okay.
So we're trying to make sense of it and what kind of God allows for this to happen. We know that God can do whatever He wants to with a man, but for some reason, this is important to the name that Jacob is given, Israel, and to the blessing. Because here in this dialogue, it's the two things that are mentioned twice, name and blessing. And so I got to looking at it a little bit more because we just kind of ran by it and did a little more reading. And there's a background idea here that's been a part, I guess, of this from the beginning. And that is that God allows for a struggle in order to achieve a blessing. That struggle may be built into, more often than we think, the reception or the receiving of what God has given us as a blessing, so that it is marked. It is marked in some sort of way. Jacob's mark of his blessing was that he left in a limp. He could not deny the physical injury without disregard for the spiritual blessing. They had come as a package deal, so to speak. And in that process, the name and the blessing become attached in a real way. So he asked, God asked him his name. Of course he knows his name. But he does it purposefully so that there is a way to, first of all, enrich his name, change it from Jacob, which means trickster, to you struggled with God and prevailed with God.
That's Israel.
Yes. So the struggle is to change the name to a heightened sense of who Jacob is, and also in the same dialogue attach the blessing to the name. There's a new name, a new blessing. Same thing happens in the blessing that God provides us. As believers in Christ, we carry a new name. And the blessing of that name only comes once we receive our new name. But does it come without a struggle? So this is where I think it instructs us about our conversion and our faith. To imagine that we can enter into this life with Christ without it in some way being a struggle, a striving with God, so that we are able to meet Him in a place where He changes who we are, and we receive by that a blessing. Now the ultimate striving that occurs there occurs on the cross. We have one that strives for us. But still in all, to come to a reality of what that means is no small thing for a human being.
And don't you think that's a long process, though? It's not a one-time event.
I think that it is a life redirecting, life changing event.
Yeah.
Some people it may happen like Paul on the Damascus Road. I think it happened within hours.
Yeah.
But for other people, I think it does take much, much longer. And some people approach the way they think about life differently than, say, I would. I'm kind of it's got to be something really intense for me to give it a lot of thinking.
Well, my mind's children who accept Christ, they have to walk and grow and have that struggle.
Yes.
Because they become teenagers and then they're checking themselves, and then they become adults, and we're checking ourselves. So to
Yeah.
me, it's a lifelong process.
Yeah, and you know, I'm thinking of the kids we've had recently believed they needed to be rebaptized, and really they didn't.
Right.
But other forces in their family and their whatever
Right.
have caused
And
them
it
to
does
come to
the
that
perfect
place of
thing.
questioning.
Yeah.
So being in a good household of faith
Yeah, they don't.
allows them to
Stephen
work
has
through
never had
this.
to question his salvation or say
Right.
he'd be baptized. Yeah,
Right.
Because he knew. Right, my oldest, it was 4 or 5 times. You know.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean he's a perfect example. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're talking about two different personalities.
Oh yeah, but that's the point I'm making too. To
Yeah.
walk with Christ.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm here to tell you they were saved as the day they asked.
Yeah.
And all this lifelong, praise God, they lived. But had they not lived, they'd still be as saved as the rest of us.
Yeah.
Oh,
You,
yeah.
you look at Jacob's life and you think,
Yeah.
could God have ever meant what he said to Rebekah about Jacob? I mean, because this can't be the kind of person that God's going to pour his blessing into. But he does, because it doesn't matter what kind of people we are. It's that God chooses us. Now, he chose Jacob, I believe, because he's the youngest, and God is constantly reminding us that just because it's the oldest doesn't mean you receive the blessing. I decide who does that. And God chooses us nearly in the same way. He's chosen that those whose faith is in Christ, they are receiving that blessing of salvation. And that has nothing to do with how easy your life's going to be. It has everything to do with knowing that God is with me in everything. That's the blessing. So I just wanted to run back through that. That pretty much sums it up.
I
So-
like how you brought like a transformation moment, because it's like the story is weird, right, with the wrestling, but the sun goes down as he sends all the camps over the river to go meet Esau, and he's left on that one side. The sun goes down, he wrestles with the guy until daybreak, and in the daybreak, like next verse,
Yeah.
Esau's there. You know, it's like God was preparing him for that moment when he would, you know, this climactic moment.
Yeah, it's like before he meets Esau, God has to know that Israel now is sure
Yeah,
of his place with God.
yeah, perfect. Yep,
Yeah,
I completely agree.
and
He named everything.
yeah, to me,
Well,
it's
he
me.
did
It's great.
pray to him before this all happened too.
That's
He
right.
was praying to him and called him, you know, the God of his forefathers of Abraham and all of that, you know. So he prayed to him about that.
Another good point. Yeah, he prayed and he received what he prayed for, but it was not without a struggle.
Yeah.
So often, that's another good point to make. We ask God for our life, basically, and he's saying, you know, are you sure you know what you're asking for? There's a struggle here. And I'm going to, at the end of that struggle, you're going to be more than when you went in, but you just got to know that there's going to be a struggle. And it is not meant for defeat. It is meant to elevate. Wow, huh? We think about struggling and wrestling, and somebody's got to lose. And God says, no, in my world, I elevate through that struggle.
It's the opposite of what the world teaches.
Yeah, yeah,
The opposite, yeah.
yeah. And we find no losers in this whole episode. Everybody is enriched. All right, 33. Now Jacob looked up, and he saw Esau coming toward him. That now Jacob looked up. It's a shift in the whole scene. It's like writing a movie. So it really is screenplay. He looked up and saw Esau coming toward him with 400 men. Okay, we've already gotten the word earlier, right? So that was the foreshadowing. This whole event has occurred with moving the two camps over. He's one camp and there's another camp. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two slave women. They've all got their children now. He put the slaves and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and
Nice.
Joseph last. Okay?
We know who we love the most.
Yeah. He himself went on ahead and bowed to the ground 7 times until he approached his brother. But that had to be quite a spectacle. You got this, I mean, this is a huge group of people. And every so many steps, or however he's decided to do this, he bows down, prostrate before his brother.
And I guess in their culture, you wouldn't chop somebody's head off if they're bound down before you. Huh?
Well,
or would that have been an easier way to
well,
do
that was the whole thing. When you bowed your head, you were offering your neck.
That's what I thought. That's
Yeah.
what I mean. Is that supposed to be, if they're doing that, that's not necessarily a way that you should, I mean, you would not normally want to cut their head
You
off.
wouldn't do it
That's
because
what
it would be
because he would
dishonorable
be-
at that
yeah,
point.
Yeah, because he'd be saying, I'm giving you everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But Esau ran to meet him. This brings me to the prodigal son story every time. He runs to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Just sounds just like the prodigal father, or the loving father story. Then they wept. Period. So here they are. How long? This has been 20 years, a little more maybe. And
they were twins.
they were twins.
So twins has got even a special bond.
Yeah. Now, this word for wept, it's strong weeping. It's emotional tears. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he asked, "Who are these with you?" And he answered, "The children God has graciously given your servant." Now, the mothers had all thanked God in various ways as they were having these children, but this is the first time Jacob is acknowledging. So in essence, he's acknowledging the blessing, he's acknowledging the promise, everything in that statement. Then the slaves and their children approached him and bowed down. Leah and her children also approached and bowed down, and then Joseph and Rachel approached and bowed down. So Esau said, "What do you mean by this whole procession I met?" So he's asking him, what is, you've sent all this stuff. What is it supposed to mean? He says, "To find favor with you." And he says, "I have enough, brother. Keep what you have. I don't need more servants. I don't need more anything. You just keep what you have." Okay, so this is this whole episode here is about hospitality and how hospitality attaches itself to peace and acceptance. So we don't want to run by and miss the hospitality that's being offered back and forth here. Now, the last time we saw this kind of exchange, it was Jacob and Laban, and they were not being hospitable. They were on the surface, but they were both scheming under the surface. Here we have something totally different going on here. So he says, "But Jacob said, 'No, please, if I have found favor with you, take this gift from me, for indeed I have seen your face, and it is like seeing God's face, since you have accepted me.'" Bam. Right, that's huge. He's just wrestled face to face with God. Okay? And he was accepted by God. And so the foreshadowing, that the preparing that you mentioned, is now bringing to fulfillment here. Since you have accepted me, like he accepted me. "Please take my present that was brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and I have everything I need." So Jacob urged him until he accepted. So here we have that there is a overabundance, there is a flowing, an overflowing of life is one way to look at this. And so he wants him to have this because God has given everything I need. I want you to have an abundance, okay, because of this. Because Esau's already said, "I've got everything I need." So there is a flowing from God's man to the brother that is extravagant. Let's just put it that way. So that'll preach. That's what we all want to do. Then Jacob said, "Let's move on, and I'll go ahead of you." And Jacob replied, That Esau said, I'm sorry. And Jacob replied. Okay, let me ask a question here. Just what you're thinking is, the narrator knows, the writer knows that he's now Israel. That's his name. But he keeps calling him Jacob. So why do you think that is?
Would Esau would know him as Jacob?
Yeah, Esau would have only known him as Jacob. This is the name that God's given him. So as far as we know, he hasn't shared it with anyone. So we're let in on the secret.
Yeah.
But when we read through the story, no one else is. It only becomes a matter of this, the significance of the name for Jacob comes about when he loses his son. Then being able to strive with God and prevail means more than it would have ever meant before then, see? Because when we're beginning to see the foreshadowing of that with Jacob and Rachel being the special ones, held back, being close to the rear where they're protected and safe. But then when all that falls apart with Joseph and he's sold into slavery, that's when the struggle really begins for him, see? And he really does become Israel. Okay, so I think that's what it is. So Jacob replied, "My Lord knows that the children are weak, and I have nursing flocks and herds. If they are driven hard for one day, the whole herd will die. Let my Lord go ahead of his servant. I will continue on slowly at a pace suited to the livestock and the children until I come to my Lord at Seir." So it's a long way from Mesopotamia, okay? And the land that they've come through is arid and like a high mountain desert. And so rightfully so, it's been taxing on them. Esau said, "Let me leave some of my people with you." But he replied, "Why do that? Please indulge me, my Lord." So Jacob striving with Esau, but not as a means of, this is not antagonistic. They're trying to outdo each other's care for one another here. That day Esau started on his way back to Seir, but Jacob went to Succoth. He built a house for himself and shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth, which means stalls or huts.
Yeah.
All right.
I was supposed to follow his brother back to says Seir.
Seir.
I thought he was supposed to follow him back.
Well, we're gonna.
Find out why he did it.
Yeah, let's see what happens here. After Jacob came from Padam Aram, he arrived safely at Shechem in the land of Canaan and camped in front of the city. He purchased. Now we've moved on to somewhere else, right? He purchased a section of a field where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 200 pieces of silver. And he set up an altar there and called it God, the God of Israel. So, that is Eloi Israel. Yeah. So he buys a piece of land in the land that God's already given him. Who else did that? Abraham did the same thing. He buys it so that he can have a place. Man, by this time I would think he would just want to have a place to rest for a while. But in this little narrative here, we kind of see that God has blessed him. Remember the angels that went before him. Everything's kind of gone according to God's purpose and will here. All right. Any comments about that? Just blew right through those chapters.
Yeah.
A lot of narrative that.
Seems to be a very happy occasion.
Yeah.
Esau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here we come up with now we got next the story of Dinah.
This one's good.
Yeah,
It's
this
so
is-
bad it's good.
Yeah. It kind of works as a counterweight. Everything's kind of syrupy sweet right now. Everything's going good. And then we have this, you know. So Leah's daughter, Dinah, whom Leah bore to Jacob, went out to see some of the young women of the area. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, who was the region's chieftain, saw her, he took her and raped her. He became infuriated with Jacob's daughter, Dinah. He loved the young girl and spoke tenderly to her. Give me this girl as my wife, he told his father. Infatuated, not infuriated. I need new glasses. So he raped her, and now he wants her for his own, to be his wife. Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were with the livestock in the field, he remained silent until they returned. Meanwhile, Shechem's father, Hamor, came to speak with Jacob. Jacob's sons returned from the field when they heard about the incident. They were deeply grieved and very angry. For Shechem had committed an outrage against Israel. Now we have a change in the name by raping Jacob's daughter. And such a thing should not be done. So this is the writer kind of projecting what the name of the nation is, Israel. So this whole episode is a defilement, not only of what's happening to Dinah and now, but it remained so for the entire nation, for generations following. So they became angry because they had done this thing. So no more hospitality. They didn't find any hospitality from Shechem. They only found abuse. So Hamor said to Jacob's sons, "My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Live with us. The land is before you. Settle here, move about, and acquire property in it." Okay, so who's running the show here?
Looks like Shechem.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I'm over here taking what I want, and Dad, you go and tell everybody to come be part of us, but this is me. I want this.
Now, Jacob's never done anything as dastardly as this, but it's the same kind of attitude that he has just learned how to overcome. And he's developed a strength of character and life now based on what God is providing.
Yeah, because he held his peace.
Yeah.
He held his peace.
And we're here experiencing the taking of life by Shechem. And so everything's the wrong side. It's all getting tossed around here and messed up. And Shechem's father has decided this is a good plan. We'll just intermarry. Nowhere has God said, go and intermarry. You give your daughters, we'll give our daughters. This whole thing now has become more about what? Getting into the rich man's family. Okay? And we'll do it by any means necessary, even rape. So this is, so he rapes her, and he says, "Oh yeah, I want you for my wife. And by the way, let's all do this." Not a good scene.
The ways of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really change much. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Grant me this favor, and I'll give you whatever you say. Demand of me a high compensation and gift. I'll give you whatever you ask me. Just give the girl to be my wife!" Exclamation point. Okay? So he's speaking to a man that has everything. He's already tried to give away provisions to his brother who had to be kind of coerced into taking it or convinced that it was the right thing to do to take it. So he's not in need of stuff. What matters more here is family. So we're back to the concept of geography and genealogy going on here. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. We cannot do this thing, they said to him. Giving our sister to an uncircumcised man is a disgrace to us. We will agree with you only on this condition, if all your males are circumcised as we are. All right, so, interesting thing here. We want your women, and we want to intermingle our wealth. And the brothers say, no, let's do it this way. You claim the covenant of our God. There's the comparison. That's the way it appears on the surface, right?
That's not the long plan.
That's
though.
not- that's-
the long range plan.
Yeah.
We're gonna hurt you if we kill you. But
Yeah.
we're not telling you that.
Yeah.
But the leverage that they're using is not something that can be substantiated in property or in flesh, other than the flesh of the circumcision. So, interesting, right?
You mean they're Jacob's children?
Yeah, he says, then we will give you our daughters. Take your daughters for ourselves, live with you, and become one people under the covenant, not one people according to property rights and all that stuff. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. These words seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young men did not delay doing this because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Dinah was some kind of girl. Now he was the most important of all the family of his father's family. So this is the head honcho. This is the eldest son, the one that's in charge of everything. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the city, to the gate of their city, and spoke to the men of their city. These men are peaceful toward us, they said. Dun dun dun. A little foreshadowing there. They let us live in our land and move about in it, for indeed the region is large enough for them. Let's take their daughters as our wives and give our daughters to them. But the men will agree to live with us and be one people only on this condition, if all our men are circumcised as they are. Won't their livestock, their possessions, and all their animals become ours? Let us agree with them, and they will live with us. So the motivation here, they are cloaking their motivation by Dinah and the daughters, but really they're looking to enrich themselves. And of course, we find out here in a little bit that Jacob's sons are cloaking their motivation by offering a one covenant under God solution to life together. So all the men who had come to the city gates listened to Hamor and his son Shechem. And all those men were circumcised. On the third day, while they were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords, went into the unsuspecting city, and killed every male.
Two of them.
Two of them did it. Yeah, they killed Hamor and his son Shechem with their swords, took Dinah from Shechem's house, and went away. Jacob's sons came to the slaughter and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks, herd, donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. They captured all their possessions, dependents, and wives, and plundered everything in the houses. So this is Jacob justice. Okay, right here. They go in, and what is the most important thing here for the sons of Jacob? Is it revenge? Or is it like honor?
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
think they saw. I think
Yeah.
they saw themselves as honoring,
Yeah.
Dinah. How dare they do this to our daughter? But at the same time, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to be vengeful. We're going to kill y'all.
Yeah.
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 So they do it with a motivation of purity and genealogy, but they actually act in a way that would have been more like Hamor and Shechem would have acted. So they they took on the traits of the people they were living with when it was convenient, and served them as a means of turning against it. So yeah, there's a real bit of confusion here. We haven't yet seen the God of armies at work. We've just seen God dealing with individuals and taking care of business, so to speak, through the person. But this may have been one of those times where we had hoped God would show up as the God of armies and maybe done something different. But this is what happened. They plundered everything. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. We are few in number. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they answered, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" So it all comes down to that. We are not going to let our sister be treated in such a way. And what they're ultimately saying is they're not going to treat your name that way. And now his name is, I wrestled with God and I prevailed. Can you imagine that being your name and just fall weak before a man like Shechem that does this terrible thing? Any other thoughts come up as you work through that little bit of?
Well, it goes back to God being in control, and when I say the two, how did two people do that to a whole city? I don't care how
sick they were and in pain they
Men
were. Right?
stood up and defended their families, even in their pain. So God obviously allowed two of the biggest, baddest Israelites to wipe them
And
out.
wipe them out.
He
Yeah.
allowed it.
Yeah.
He allowed it. Because I don't think a whole city could not have defeated two people had it not been God.
Right.
I mean, Israel was
Even
mad
the women.
at them, but God didn't stop them.
Yeah,
You know.
God has to be with them for it to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking, there's nobody gonna come to Dillon Springs and wipe out all. Not as long as I'm there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, even as wife and children. I mean, I guess
Right.
their culture could have been different, but it'd be like, no, I'm picking up my sword. And you're not coming here and killing my boys.
Yeah.
You know.
So is it interesting at the end that Jacob is kind of concerned about his stuff?
Yeah.
The Canaanites and the Perizzites are going to Perizzites are going to combine and they're going to come after my household and my stuff. So he's kind of his priorities being
Yeah, and the kids have to come back and say, but Dad, what about our sister?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I love the way that ends, just because it's like it leaves you on a question, like that it doesn't answer itself. It's just kind of like, well, you know, like what is the prudent way for you? You're not supposed to disregard Dinah, but like you also have a point in like not offending the inhabitants. It's just hard. Like how far do we go to like make right with honor?
Yeah.
You know, and obviously they went too far. Like it's pretty clear. But I just like how it's almost like a gospel kind of like mic drop. When Jesus like ends a conversation with that like one pithy quote, it's kind of like that. That's why I like it so much.
yeah. It reminds me of the end of Jonah, where God says, "What would you expect me to do? You want me to wipe all these people out? I mean, look at their repentance." And here they're asking this question: "You think we're just going to let this pass? Look what they did." So it's the opposite, but it's the same kind of reasoning that occurs. The other thing here, I think, is important to point out. We don't know the timeline exactly that this is happening, but we know that it couldn't be too far along in the story, because Joseph is an infant here, and we see in just a couple of chapters that he's still not very old. So these sons are in their early 20s, late teens. They're not thinking about life in the same way that their father is thinking about life. They're thinking about, okay, this inheritance that they see Okay? All that their father has. Yeah, that's good, but I've got the rest of my life to build that kind of wealth. This is my sister. And this is the only time I will ever have to avenge my sister's dishonor. So the family, even though we see this terrible thing that's happening, we see a unity and gelling of the family that we really didn't see up until now. Before then, it was Jacob and Esau at each other, and for 20 years they didn't know what to expect when they saw each other. And ultimately, it's a hospitable reunion. And here, it's kind of the same kind of gelling of the family. They've come together and they're protecting the genealogy that ultimately is the promise.
And and I guess it's age with me too. I don't necessarily think what they did was wrong.
Yeah.
Because you let somebody, when y'all have children, hurt your child.
Yeah, that's right.
You gotta think twice. You wanna kill them,
Yeah.
especially when they do something like this.
Yeah.
Now, as old as I am, I would, probably think twice about it now. But, when Tim and Amber were growing up, if somebody hurt Amber,
And you were young.
he was after them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was after them.
Yeah.
And so I think, and so their dad's like, what have y'all done? You shouldn't have done that. But he brought them in on this too and told them what had happened to their sister. Did he not expect them to be so angry?
Yeah.
That they would have done something. You got all these sons in that family. Of course they did something.
Yeah.
One of them was going to be stupid.
Right.
But it was two of them that went out
Yeah.
and did something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
still, I'm like, Caretha, God didn't stop that.
No?
He could have stopped, or those two could have died doing that.
It didn't have to go that way
Yeah.
if it wasn't. I mean, to me, it would
Well,
not.
God's providence is there. That is
Right. It
certain.
would not have gone that way had God not been there.
Yeah.
I mean, if he had
Yeah.
not allowed it. Because, yeah.
And I mean, these people couldn't have been too good if the
Oh, no, this bunch, it wasn't a good bunch. It's
yeah,
not a good group.
if this dad was like, well, that's okay, you raped her and
Yeah.
you want her for your wife.
Yeah, they had to be
Yeah.
pretty raunchy.
And
Can
they,
you
they do
imagine
cause
how
lots of
Dinah felt?
problems later.
I would,
Yeah.
I would have been like, I'm not going with him. Y'all are nuts.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Did you get, where do we see this same kind of scene again? Later.
David's.
In David's,
Yeah.
David's house.
Yes, I was thinking about that this whole time. I was like, David raped
Yeah.
Bathsheba, and then he has kids doing it, and he gets
John,
mad at his kids. And I'm
Jonathan laid quiet and then waited for his time and then,
I was thinking
took his
more-
brother's life.
I was thinking of
The,
the sister.
yeah.
The sister.
Sister.
Yeah, they-
Tamar.
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 Yeah.
Tamar,
Yeah.
right.
Amnon or something
Yeah.
like that.
Amongst
Yeah.
his children. Same thing amongst David's
It
children.
was
Yeah,
amongst
same
David's
thing.
children. Yeah.
And the outcome of that was David became almost paralyzed as a leader. He couldn't make a decision. He couldn't do anything
Until the boy was killed.
until Jonathan, ran him out of town. He went out in disgrace. Had a crazy man throwing rocks at him off a cliff. It was the whole thing.
Came from Hollywood.
Yeah. So, but in a lot of ways, Joab is like these sons. He took care of the problem
Yeah, you're right.
for the honor of the home of the house, of David's house. And the same thing is involved here. David has been promised a kingship forever, and the promise is being wrapped up in all of this. So a lot of parallels and a lot of
It just goes back to there's nothing new under the sun. Even
Yeah.
in all of these
Even in this.
stories, it's just the
Yeah.
same old thing. There's nothing new.
We're so busy being humans.
Yeah.
On a narrative note, this is the first time like one of Jacob's sons actually does something right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It starts to signal a shift towards his
That's
sons.
because we just know their names up until now.
Yeah, and
And
now next chapter is like he gets
Yeah,
left
then-
again, and then his wives die, and Esau's descendants, and then Joseph's story.
Yeah.
So it's really just like shifting.
It's
And
just
which
heating up,
one
yeah.
was it that saved Joseph for not to kill him? Was it
The oldest one.
Simeon? Was he the oldest?
I
No,
thought-
not Simeon.
Not
um,
Reuben.
Reuben,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, he was the oldest.
Oh yeah, Reuben.
Oh,
Yeah.
throw Joseph in the pit.
Yeah.
What?
So
All right.
Simeon and the other one was probably kind of young, so they said, let's go do this. You know,
Yeah.
and Reuben probably, if he had known, he might have tried to talk him out of it. You know, but yeah, they went off and did it.
Yeah, I think there's some value in looking at all of that because we do some things when we're younger, and you know we have a air of self-righteousness about us, even though the last question asked really does set it all straight. There's no way we're letting this offense stand. And you know, we all reach a point where we should probably think more like that. Things happen in the world, and let's just take a stand.
Righteous anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So God said to Jacob, chapter 35, "Get up!" Exclamation point. It's like you've been sitting around here long enough. Get up.
Yelling at
Go to Bethel and settle there. Okay, remember Bethel when he was leaving Esau? He met. Is that the stairway where the angels were going up and down? So he said, "Go to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his family and all who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods that are among you." Isn't that interesting? It's time to move, and Jacob knows we're not taking anything that's going to distract us from God. If we're going to the house of God, no foreign gods. Purify yourselves and change your clothes. Life is not going to be the same. Everything's going to be different when we get there. You're not even going to have the same clothes on. You must get up and go to Bethel. I will build an altar there to the God who answered me in the day of my distress. He has been with me everywhere I have gone. Now we see this for the first time. Jacob is acknowledging that he's lived a providential life with God. That all of this time he was scheming and doing all this stuff, and now he knows this was providential activity by God to care for me and to provide for me, to accomplish God's program. And so at the end we find that he begins to understand more and more this has less to do with me and more to do with God's program of the promise. Then they gave Jacob all their foreign gods and their earrings, and Jacob hid them under the oak tree near Shechem. When they set out, a terror from God came over the cities around them, and they did not pursue Jacob's sons. So he was worried about the Perizzites and the who the Otherites. I keep forgetting them. Yeah, the Canaanites. But they didn't have to worry because God's already taken care of that. He put a terror on them. So Jacob and all who were with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. Jacob built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, or El Bethel, because it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Okay, God, the house of God. Deborah, the one who had nursed and raised Rebekah, died. Wow. She'd been around a while. Deborah, the one who nursed and raised Rebekah, died and was buried under the oak of Bethel. So Jacob named it, the tree that is, meaning oak of weeping. So a whole nother study that Tim Mackey likes to do about trees in the Old Testament. We're not even going to go because it's, but it's, and the reason why he's interested in it is he found an obscure book that had like 200 copies of it printed, and he paid $500 for this book. And it's the only author he can find in all of biblical literature that discusses the symbolism of trees through the Old Testament.
Trees matter. You cannot even get caught getting on an airplane with the acorn from Israel, or you will be fine.
Wow.
Because there's a lot of history about the trees and when different people who took over the land raped it and their trees were no more, and how trees are such a, I guess, a picture. I don't know what that guy's book is about, but it's such a picture of God's provision, I guess, or him
Yeah.
roots and just everything a tree can serve, because they matter even today in the land of Israel.
He sees them.
That tree, you couldn't travel.
Yeah. The thing that I remember about his discussion about it is they represent life and the continuation of life. So they become an image of eternal life. The way that Tim Mackey was talking about this writer in this book. And when you start looking at them, lo and behold, there's a lot about trees that bear witness to things that are life-giving, and like this, she's buried there, and there's a kind of a symbolism of her life carrying on. So, for some people it would sound, hocus pocus,
Yes,
but it's really not, because they wrote that way and weaved all those things into
And then
their
when they
writing.
destroyed, I mean, I remember what we were taught when we were on tour there. What era was it when they came in and took over? I mean, later, like I guess 1300s, 1400s, more our modern time, not all the
Right.
biblical times. But they talked about how when they came in and raped the land like that, how it almost all but destroyed Israel, because nobody could live and survive, because all of the trees and the fruit
Yeah.
and whatever was totally destroyed.
Gone.
And that was how they tried to conquer lands, by going in and
Yeah,
destroying all their
yeah.
vegetation, if you will, or all,
Like we do today, we just carpet bomb it where it won't produce, and there they would just take the vegetation.
they would just cut it
Yeah.
down.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, verse 9. God appeared to Jacob again after he returned from Padan Aram and blessed him. So now this blessing thing's becoming a regular thing for old Jacob. He blessed him, and God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. You will no longer be named Jacob, but your name will be Israel." All right, so we've already gone through this episode. Why is he saying this again? Why does he say this again?
Because he's been Jacob for a while still. I mean,
He's reminded
he's still, his boys are over there acting like him.
It's a change of scenery.
Yeah.
He's in this new place. He's in the house of God now, and he's making sure that all of these, the writer, at least God speaking, is making sure that all these concepts come together. Location, name, genealogy, and blessing. It all comes together again so that we're crystal clear about what God is up to. So he named him Israel. God also said to him, "I am God Almighty." I think it's maybe the second time he refers to himself like that. "Be fruitful and multiply." Bam. So we're back. He said that to Adam and Eve. He said that to Noah. He hinted it in the covenant blessing. So he's saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, indeed, an assembly of nations will come from you, and kings will descend from you." So he's reminding him that my program here, Jacob, is I am building a huge house for lots of people. They're all going to be here with you and with me. He says, "I will give you the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, and I will give you the land, give the land to your future descendants." Then God withdrew from him at that place where he had spoken to him. So God comes in, makes his pronouncement, and now he's gone. Okay, only he's not gone. So this appears to be almost like theophany kind of thing, where there's a presence at least that speaks, and then the presence is there no more. So we find that later in the pillar of fire and the cloud, and we find it in other places where God appears. So I thought I never even paid attention to verse 13 until I was looking at the rest of this. So Jacob set up a marker at that place where he had spoken to him, a stone marker. He poured a drink offering on it and poured oil on it, and Jacob named the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. All right, so there's some commentators that read this as a retelling of the story, the original story, but now, because of all that Jacob has gone through, the original story has more meaning. The altar, the anointing, the place. Because you have to ask yourself, why would there be 2 altars now when he built one before? And so I think that's a good explanation. You'd have to believe, okay, the other altar fell over, or something like that, or somebody knocked it down. But that's never brought up. So I like the idea, like it's now baptized, in a sense. There was the old altar, and it had one meaning, and that was Jacob said, hey, God lives here. He's going up and down out of heaven. So it was a very naive type of acknowledgement that this is the house of God. But now God's told him to return there, and what's being stated here is the blessing and the name change, and all of this happens here. And so there's kind of a re-anointing of this
He's
same.
been repairing the original altar.
Yeah.
And he was just shoring it up,
Yeah.
putting fresh stones on it, and putting, so we're gonna make
That's
another
right.
sacrifice, if you will, for the oil. But I mean, it's,
Yeah.
offering, make another.
So this is what crawled all over me when I was reading this. So there was one level of worship for Jacob when he was running scared, and God meets him, and now there's this entirely new level of worship where he's not running scared. He's the one that's received the promise. He's not the trickster anymore. He's the one that wrestled with God and prevailed. He's one that had to steal a blessing before, and now he's been granted a blessing by God. So everything about his life has been elevated, and so as a result, his worship is elevated.
He's more intimate
Yeah,
with God. Yeah.
I think that's what happens to us. The more that we encounter God in ways that we see that it is only by his hand, and that it is something that's merciful and not anything that we deserve, I think our worship should naturally progress. And
The old song, the long run, though, the sweeter you grow.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, we're going to quit there for tonight. Where Rachel dies, the favorite dies.
Rachel's a big deal in Israel too.
I bet, huh?
I mean, she still is. I mean, she weeps for the modern day children.